On a cold December day in 1943, among the young soldiers dying in the ruthless grip of war on the shores of Normandy, a photographer was loading his last cartridge into his camera. Robert Kellerman was an experienced war photographer working for the Associated Press. Until that moment, he had taken hundreds of photographs, images mixing death, pain, hope, and heroism. However, the last photograph he would take that day would become one of history's greatest mysteries. When Kellerman turned his lens toward the square of a town turned to rubble, the scene he saw through his viewfinder left him bewildered. Among the bombed buildings, people in period clothing were running, screaming, trying to survive. But among them, there was a figure standing in the left corner that seemed to come from outside of time itself. So, a young man wearing a modern hooded sweatshirt, holding a strange, thin, rectangular object in his hand. His face turned directly toward the camera. His hair was cut in a style that didn't belong to the 1940s, and he wore sneakers on his feet that didn't exist in that era. And most surprisingly, there was no expression of fear, shock, or pain on his face. He had a calm expression as if he knew he was supposed to be there. When Kellerman pressed his finger on the trigger, he didn't know that this moment would become one of the most debated images throughout history, because this photograph would turn a young man's life upside down 81 years later. In October 2024, 23-year-old graphic designer Jake Morrison, living in Minneapolis, was sipping his morning coffee while browsing social media. He followed a page about World War II documentaries, and the photograph shared that morning caused him to drop his coffee cup, because in that black and white photograph taken in 1943, he saw himself. Jake's heart was beating so fast that he was having trouble breathing. He looked more closely at the photograph, enlarged the screen, examined every detail, the facial features, nose shape, eye area, even that small line at the corner of his lips were identical. It was as if he was looking at himself in a mirror. But what was truly shocking was the object the figure in the photograph was holding in his hand. Jake was used to taking selfies in the same pose, and that rectangular object he was holding resembled a smartphone. At first, he thought it might be a joke, perhaps a manipulation done with Photoshop. However, the page that uploaded the photograph was an extremely reliable academic platform sharing archival sources. The original negative of the photograph was located in the National Archives in Washington and had passed all digital analysis tests. This was an original, unmanipulated photograph dated 1943. With trembling fingers, Jake downloaded the photograph and messaged his closest friend Marcus. "Look at this photo. It was taken in 1943. Does the man in it look like me, or am I going crazy?" Marcus's response came within minutes. "Dude, isn't this you? You're identical. How is this possible?" Jake didn't know how to deal with this situation. He called his family and sent them the photograph. The astonishment in his mother Sarah Morrison's voice could be felt even through the phone line. "Jake, this isn't possible, but you look so much alike. It's as if you were there." His father's comment was even more disturbing. "Son, you know your grandfather also died in the war, in Normandy." Maybe what, Dad? Maybe there's a similarity in the family, genetically, but Jake knew this couldn't just be genetic similarity, because the person in the photograph didn't just resemble him, he was exactly him. So it was even the same tattoo mark on his right wrist, though it wasn't visible in the photograph. Jake was aware of it. That night, he couldn't sleep. He constantly examined the photograph, researched on the internet, read time travel theories. He researched parallel universe theories. Everything had to have a logical explanation. The next morning, Jake had made a decision. He would find out where this photograph came from, how it was taken. His first stop was the National Archives in Washington. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, who worked at the archives, told Jake the details of the photograph. This photograph was taken by Robert Kellerman on December 15, 1943, in the town of Saint-Pierre-du-Mont, France. It was the last photograph Kellerman took that day. because an hour later, he lost his life in a bomb attack. Is there any doubt about the photograph's authenticity? None at all. It was examined with the latest technology devices. The negative is original. Its chemical composition belongs to the 1940s. There are no manipulation traces. This photograph was definitely taken in 1943. Jake examined the photograph once more. This time there were other details that caught his attention. So behind the figure in the photograph, on the wall of a building turned to rubble, there were strange marks, like graffiti. But graffiti art wasn't widespread in 1943 yet, Dr. Hartwell. For you ever examined these marks on this wall? Elizabeth enlarged the photograph. I hadn't noticed these details before. I have no idea what these symbols mean. Jake took a high-resolution copy of the photograph to examine these symbols more closely. When he got home, he began analyzing these symbols. And what he discovered surprised him even more. The marks on the wall were a very simple but meaningful message. JM 2024, Jake Morrison's initials, and the year 2024. This could no longer be a coincidence. Jake was almost certain that the person in the photograph was himself. But how was this possible? Time travel only existed in science fiction movies. Or did it? Jake continued researching on the subject with an obsession that consumed his every waking moment. He studied quantum physics theories late into the night, his eyes burning from staring at computer screens filled with complex equations and theoretical frameworks. He read about time loops, diving deep into the works of Einstein, Hawking, and contemporary physicists who dared to explore the boundaries of temporal mechanics. He researched parallel universe hypotheses, exploring the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, wormhole theories, and the possibility of alternate timelines bleeding into one another. Days turned into weeks as Jake became increasingly isolated from his normal life. His work as a graphic designer suffered as he called in sick repeatedly, unable to focus on anything but the mystery that had taken over his existence. His apartment became a maze of printed articles, books on theoretical physics, and whiteboards covered with timelines and diagrams attempting to make sense of the impossible. Marcus visited him one evening, finding Jake surrounded by chaos. "Dude, you look terrible. When's the last time you showered or ate something that wasn't from a vending machine?" "Marcus, you don't understand," Jake said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "This isn't just some weird coincidence. Look at this." He showed his friend a timeline he'd created, connecting various historical events, electromagnetic anomalies, and reported time-slip incidents. "There's a pattern here. Saint-Pierre-du-Mont isn't the only place where this has happened." Marcus looked at the elaborate conspiracy theory-like display with concern. "Jake, I think you need to step back from this, maybe talk to someone professional." "I am talking to professionals," Jake snapped, then immediately apologized. "I'm sorry. I found something." "There are other cases, Marcus. People throughout history who've reported similar experiences. Temporal displacement, anachronistic figures appearing in historical photographs, unexplained modern objects found in archaeological digs." Jake pulled out a folder filled with photocopied newspaper articles and academic papers. "Look at this, 1887. A photographer in Victorian London captured an image of a woman wearing clearly modern clothing during Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee." Here, 1962, Dealey Plaza in Dallas. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a man with a digital camera filming the Kennedy assassination. But when investigators tried to find him, he had vanished. He spread out more documents, ancient cave paintings in France, showing figures holding rectangular objects that emit light, medieval tapestries depicting people in anachronistic clothing. This has been happening for centuries, maybe millennia. We just never connected the dots because each incident was isolated, dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications. Marcus picked up one of the papers, a scholarly article from a university journal. "Jake, even if some of this is real, what does it have to do with you?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Jake said, his eyes bright with manic energy. But I think it's connected to bloodlines, to families. I've been researching my genealogy, tracing back as far as I can go. And Marcus, there are gaps, strange gaps where records just stop, or where family members are described in historical documents as mysterious or appearing from nowhere. He pulled out a genealogy chart covered in red ink annotations. My great-great-grandmother appeared in a small town in Ohio in 1889, with no background, no family history, no explanation of where she came from. The town records describe her as speaking with unusual knowledge of future events and possessing strange devices of unknown origin. She was eventually accepted into the community and married, but the mystery of her origins was never solved. And my great-uncle Thomas, Jake continued, his finger tracing another line on the family tree. He was a photographer during World War I, and several of his photographs were confiscated by military authorities because they showed anachronistic elements that couldn't be explained. He disappeared in 1918, right after the armistice, and was never seen again. Marcus was beginning to look genuinely concerned. Jake, you're starting to sound like a crazy person. No. But Marcus, what if it's not crazy? What if there are families, bloodlines that are somehow connected to these temporal anomalies? What if we're not bound by normal linear time the way other people are? It was during this intense period of research that Jake came across an article by a quantum physicist named Dr. Maria Santos. But it wasn't just the article that caught his attention. It was the author's biography. Santos mentioned in her credentials that her research had been partially inspired by her own family's unusual experiences with temporal phenomena. In her article, titled Temporal Anomalies and Quantum Tunneling, Dr. Santos argued that time and space were not linear and that under certain conditions, time loops could form. According to the article, in strong electromagnetic fields and high energy levels, cracks could form in the space-time continuum, and these cracks could connect different time periods. But what made Jake's hands shake as he read was a footnote at the end of the article. The author wishes to acknowledge the contributions of the Santos family archives, which contain documented cases of temporal displacement dating back to the 16th century. These family records have provided crucial empirical data for the theoretical framework presented in this paper. Jake immediately tried to contact Dr. Santos, but reaching her proved more difficult than expected. The university where she works said she was on sabbatical, conducting field research at undisclosed locations. Her research assistant would only say that Dr. Santos was investigating active temporal anomaly sites and couldn't be reached through normal channels. Finally, after 2 weeks of persistent attempts, Jake received an encrypted email from an address he didn't recognize. I know who you are, Jake Morrison. I've been expecting your contact for some time. Meet me at the Quantum Research Facility at MIT, Building 26100, tomorrow at 3 p.m. Come alone and bring the photograph. The message was unsigned, but somehow Jake knew it was from Dr. Santos. The next day, Jake found himself in a sterile, high-tech laboratory filled with equipment he couldn't begin to understand. Particle accelerators, quantum computers, and devices that seemed to bend light around them filled the space. Dr. Santos was a woman in her 50s with prematurely gray hair and intense green eyes that seemed to look through rather than at him. Mr. Morrison, she said without preamble, show me the photograph. Jake handed over the high-resolution print he'd made of Kellerman's photograph. Dr. Santos placed it under a device that scanned it with various types of light, creating detailed digital analysis on multiple screens around them. As I suspected, she murmured, studying the readouts. The electromagnetic signature is consistent with what we call a Class 5 temporal intrusion. The energy levels recorded in this image are off the charts. This isn't just a photograph, Jake. It's evidence of one of the most significant temporal events ever documented. Dr. Santos, in your article, you mentioned your family archives. Are you like me? Do you have experiences with temporal displacement? Dr. Santos was quiet for a long moment, then walked over to a wall covered with photographs and documents. My family has been documenting these experiences for over 400 years, Jake. We call ourselves Temporal Witnesses, and we're not alone. There are maybe 24 families worldwide who share this ability. She pointed to various photographs on the wall. My great-great-great-grandmother appeared in a daguerreotype from 1847, wearing a dress that wouldn't be invented until 1923. My grandfather was photographed at the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, but he was born in 1920. My own daughter has appeared in photographs from the 1960s, despite being born in 1995. Jake stared at the wall of impossible images. But why? What's the purpose? What are we supposed to do with this gift, curse? We don't know, Dr. Santos admitted, but we have theories. Some of us believe we're living anchors, keeping the timeline stable by witnessing crucial historical moments. Others think we're collecting information, gathering data about the true nature of time itself. A few believe we're warnings, showing up at moments of great historical significance to bear witness to humanity's most important decisions. She pulled out a thick leather journal filled with handwritten notes and sketches. This is our collective research compiled over generations. We've identified patterns. Jake, temporal witnesses tend to appear at moments of great trauma, technological breakthrough, or historical significance. The bombing of Saint-Pierre-du-Mont, the San Francisco earthquake, the Kennedy assassination, the fall of the Berlin Wall, September 11th, we have family members documented at all of these events. But that's impossible, Jake said, though even as he spoke the words, he knew they were meaningless in the context of his own impossible experience. Is it, or is it, that our understanding of possibility is too limited? Dr. Santos opened the journal to a page filled with complex equations and diagrams. Time isn't a river flowing in one direction, Jake. It's more like an ocean with currents, eddies, and tides. Most people are like fish swimming in one current, moving always forward. But some of us, for reasons we don't understand, can move between currents. She showed him a map covered with pins and colored strings. We've been tracking the appearances, and there's definitely a pattern. The incidents are increasing in frequency. In the 16th century, a temporal witness might appear once every few decades. By the 19th century, it was every few years. Now we're seeing multiple events every year. What does that mean? We think it means something significant is coming, something that will require more witnesses than ever before. The timeline is becoming unstable, Jake, and families like ours, like yours, are being called to action more frequently. Dr. Santos led him to another section of the laboratory, where a complex device that looked like a metallic archway stood in the center of the room. This is our latest project. We're trying to create controlled temporal displacement to understand the mechanism behind our experiences. Have you succeeded? Partially. We can create small temporal eddies, moments where time moves differently, but we haven't achieved full displacement like what you experienced. Your case is actually one of the strongest we've documented. The fact that you left physical evidence, the graffiti on the wall, suggests your displacement was more complete than most. Jake walked closer to the device, feeling a strange humming sensation in his bones. Dr. Santos, we need to go back. I need to understand what happened in Saint-Pierre-du-Mont. There's something I'm supposed to do there. I can feel it. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Dr. Santos replied, because we need your help, Jake. Your displacement event was so strong that it created what we call a temporal anchor point. If we can study it in detail, we might finally understand the mechanism behind our abilities. She handed him a small device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a scientific instrument. This is a temporal resonance detector. It will help you measure the strength of any temporal fields you encounter. But more importantly, it will record everything you experience during displacement. You want me to go to France? I want you to go to France, and I want you to trigger the displacement event again. But this time, we'll be monitoring everything from here. Every energy reading, every quantum fluctuation, every temporal signature. Jake, you could be the key to understanding something that has puzzled our families for centuries. The weight of responsibility settled on Jake's shoulders like a heavy cloak. What if something goes wrong? What if I get stuck in the past? That's a risk, Dr. Santos admitted. But Jake, time displacement events like yours are extremely rare. Some of our families have been waiting generations for an anchor point this strong. This might be our only chance to truly understand what we are. Jake looked around the laboratory, at the impossible technology, at the wall of photographs showing his family's centuries-long connection to temporal anomalies. If I do this, if I go back and study the displacement, will I finally get answers? Will I understand why this is happening to me? I can't promise you'll get all the answers, Dr. Santos said, but I can promise you'll get more answers than you have now. And Jake, there's something else. The other families, the other temporal witnesses around the world, they're all experiencing increased activity. We think whatever is coming, whatever requires so many witnesses, is going to happen soon. Understanding your displacement might be crucial to understanding what role we're supposed to play. Jake made his decision. I'll do it. When do we leave for France? We? Dr. Santos smiled. Jake, I'm not just sending you to Saint-Pierre-du-Mont. I'm coming with you, along with Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Tokyo University. Her family has been documenting temporal anomalies in Japan for over 600 years. And Professor Eric Lindquist from Stockholm, the Lindquist family has records dating back to the Viking era. There are more of you. There are more of us, Jake. And it's time you met your extended family. Jake contacted Dr. Santos and explained his situation. Dr. Santos was initially skeptical, but after examining the photograph, her thoughts changed. Jake, this is really a very interesting situation. If this photograph is truly original, and it appears to be newer, then we're dealing with something abnormal here. The town of Saint-Pierre-du-Mont in 1943 was under heavy bombardment during the war. The electromagnetic fields created during these bombardments could theoretically have created a temporal anomaly. So you're saying time travel? Time travel is too simple an expression. I would rather call it temporal echo. Perhaps you, due to the high energy state at that moment, created an echo in the timeline. You cast a shadow into the past. This explanation confused Jake's mind. But even more surprising was Dr. Santos's suggestion. Jake, if you really want to understand this temporal anomaly, you should go to Saint-Pierre-du-Mont. Maybe we can find answers there. Jake initially hesitated about this suggestion. Going to France would be difficult both financially and psychologically, but curiosity was eating him alive. He had to learn the answer to this mystery. 3 weeks later, Jake found himself in Saint-Pierre-du-Mont once again. But this time, he wasn't alone. The team that Dr. Santos had assembled was unlike anything he could have imagined. They had set up a temporary search station in an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, filling it with equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was a quantum physicist from Tokyo University whose family had been documenting temporal anomalies in Japan for over 600 years. She showed Jake photographs of samurai warriors who appeared to be wearing modern watches and scroll paintings depicting figures with clearly anachronistic technology. Her own great-grandfather had been photographed at the bombing of Hiroshima, despite having died in 1923. The Tanaka family has a theory, she explained as they calibrated the monitoring equipment. We believe temporal displacement is connected to moments of intense emotional or spiritual significance, places where the boundary between life and death, past and future, becomes thin. Professor Eric Lindquist from Stockholm brought with him records that dated back to the Viking era. His family's documentation included runic inscriptions describing time walkers who appeared during great battles and medieval manuscripts detailing family members who were present at events that occurred decades before their births. The Vikings called it walking the thread of fate, he told Jake as they prepared for the displacement experiment. They believed certain individuals could step outside the normal flow of time to witness the moments that shaped history. They saw it as both a gift and a burden. But it was the fourth member of their team who surprised Jake the most. The Dr. Amara Okafor from the University of Lagos had brought documentation from her family, showing temporal displacements that stretched back to ancient Egypt. Her ancestors had been scribes and record keepers, and their hieroglyphic records included detailed accounts of family members appearing at the construction of the pyramids, the reign of Cleopatra, and other pivotal moments in Egyptian history. My family's records suggest that temporal displacement might be humanity's original form of historical documentation, she explained. Perhaps before written language, before recorded history, families like ours were the living libraries, the keepers of human memory across time. As Jake listened to these stories, he began to understand the magnitude of what he was part of. This wasn't just his personal mystery, it was a phenomenon that had shaped human history for millennia, documented by families around the world who had been guardians of these impossible experiences. The equipment they had brought was far more sophisticated than anything Jake could have imagined. Quantum field generators created a controlled environment around the displacement site. Temporal resonance detectors measured minute fluctuations in space-time. Electromagnetic field mappers tracked energy patterns that existed outside normal physical laws. We're essentially creating a laboratory around your displacement point, Dr. Santos explained as they positioned sensors throughout the town square. Every quantum fluctuation, every temporal signature, every energy reading will be recorded and analyzed. If you do displace again, we'll capture data that could revolutionize our understanding of time itself. Jake spent the days before the experiment learning about the history of Saint-Pierre-du-Mont in unprecedented detail. The team had uncovered records that went far beyond what he had discovered on his own. The town had been built on the site of an ancient Roman settlement, which itself had been constructed over a Celtic sacred site. Archaeological evidence suggested the location had been considered spiritually significant for over 2,000 years. There's a pattern here, Professor Lindquist observed as they studied the historical data. Throughout history, this location has been the site of significant temporal anomalies. Roman records describe visitors from tomorrow appearing during a battle in 67 AD. Medieval chronicles mention mysterious figures appearing during the Black Death. Even local folklore talks about time spirits that manifest during moments of great suffering or change. Dr. Tanaka's analysis of the electromagnetic readings was equally revealing. The geological structure beneath Saint-Pierre-du-Mont contains massive deposits of quartz crystal and rare earth metals. These materials can store and amplify electromagnetic energy. Combined with the historical trauma associated with this location, it's possible that the site itself has become a kind of temporal battery, storing energy from centuries of significant events. As the scheduled time for the displacement experiment approached, Jake found himself both excited and terrified. The weight of centuries of family history pressed down on him, along with the knowledge that what they were attempting could provide answers that humanity had been seeking for millennia. The night before the experiment, Dr. Okafor shared with Jake the most ancient records her family possessed. These hieroglyphs were created by my ancestor Cain Wazet, who lived during the reign of Ramesses II. But look at this section here. She pointed to a series of symbols. He describes witnessing events that wouldn't occur until centuries later. The rise of Christianity, the fall of Rome, even the discovery of America. He called it walking the river of years. But why? Jake asked. What's the purpose of these displacements? Why do our families have this ability? Cain Wazet believed that time was not just a dimension, but a living entity. He wrote that temporal witnesses were chosen to ensure that crucial moments in human development were properly observed and recorded, not just in books or paintings, but in the living memory of human consciousness. The Dr. Santos added her own interpretation. We think temporal displacement might be humanity's fail-safe mechanism. When events occur that are so significant, they could alter the course of human development. Witnesses are sent to ensure these moments are permanently anchored in time. Your presence in 1943, Jake, might have been crucial to ensuring that particular moment remained stable in the timeline. The morning of the experiment, Jake stood in the town square, wearing sensors that monitored everything from his brain waves to the electromagnetic field around his body. The team had positioned monitoring equipment in a circle around the displacement site, creating a net of sensors that would capture data from multiple dimensions simultaneously. Remember, Jake, Dr. Santos said through the communication device he wore, you're not just experiencing temporal displacement now, you're documenting it. Every sensation, every detail you observe could be crucial to understanding the mechanism behind these events. As 1430 approached, Jake felt the familiar sensation beginning. The world around him started to shift, colors fading, sounds becoming muffled. But this time, with the team's advanced monitoring equipment, he could see things he had missed before. Energy patterns were visible in the air around him, like streams of light connecting different points in space and time. The modern world didn't just fade away. He could see it overlaying the past, as if multiple time periods existed simultaneously in the same space. And this time, he wasn't alone in the displacement. Standing beside him, visible only during the temporal shift, were figures from different time periods. A Roman centurion with modern tactical gear, a medieval knight holding what appeared to be a digital tablet, a Victorian gentleman wearing contemporary sneakers. All of them were looking at the same point in space-time, all of them recording the same moment from their respective eras. Jake realized he was seeing other temporal witnesses, other family members from across history who had been drawn to this same location, this same moment of significance. They nodded to him in recognition. Fellow travelers in the river of time. As the bombardment began and the chaos of 1943 unfolded around him, Jake understood that he wasn't just witnessing history. He was part of a continuous chain of observers, a living network of human consciousness that spanned across centuries, ensuring that the most crucial moments in human development were never forgotten, never lost to the passage of time. The local museum director, Madame Dubois, helped Jake. Ah yes, this is the town square. It was badly damaged during the war, but that old church is still standing. Maybe you can find the photograph's location from there. After Jake found the old church, he tried to capture the angle from the photograph. And right then he discovered something surprising. The building that was in ruins in the photograph had now been rebuilt, but there were still old wall fragments in its foundation. And on those wall fragments, those mysterious graffiti were still there. The inscription, JM 2024 inches, was still readable after 81 years. Jake's hands were trembling. This was now an undeniable reality. He had really been in that town square in 1943. That night, while staying at the small hotel in the town, Jake had strange dreams, bombing sounds, screams, running people, and himself standing in the middle of that chaos in his modern clothes, his phone in his hand, recording the horror around him. When he woke up in the morning, he looked at his phone. There were new photographs taken during the night, but Jake remembered not taking any photographs at night. The photographs were images of the town square in 1943. Smoke from bombs, running people, and Robert Kellerman pointing his camera at him, taking a photograph. Jake's blood ran cold. Who had taken these photographs? And most importantly, how were they taken? When he examined the photographs on his phone, another detail caught his attention. The date information in the photograph's metadata was surprising. December 15th, 1943, 1430. Exactly the moment Kellerman took that famous photograph. Jake understood that this situation was no longer a coincidence. Something much more complex was happening here. A time loop, parallel universe, or something completely different. When he called Dr. Santos and explained the situation, the physicist's theory became even more interesting. Jake, I think you're trapped inside a temporal loop. That high-energy moment in 1943 created a bridge with your current time, and you crossed that bridge, leaving a trace in the past. Now that trace is calling you back. So what does this mean? If my theory is correct, you have to be in Saint-Pierre-du-Mont at exactly 14:30 that day, because the time loop needs to be completed. This was both exciting and frightening for Jake. If Dr. Santos was right, he would somehow go to 1943 tomorrow at 14:30, and perhaps he would be there at the moment that famous photograph was taken. The next day, Jake was standing in the town square. His watch showed 14:25. His heart was beating fast, wondering what would happen. Around him, normal 21st century life continued. Cars were passing, people were shopping, children were playing. 14:29, Jake took out his phone and started recording around him. Perhaps this would be the moment he would understand how those mysterious photographs were taken. 14:30, and at that moment, the world around Jake began to change. Colors began to fade. Sounds became muffled. Modern cars slowly disappeared, replaced by horse-drawn carriages. People's clothes changed. They began wearing 1940s clothing. When Jake looked at his own body, he was surprised. He was still wearing his modern clothes, holding his phone in his hand. However, the world around him had completely turned into 1943. And right then, the bombing sounds began. People started running, screaming. Buildings were shaking from the impact of bombs. Glass fragments were scattering everywhere. Jake stood calmly in the middle of this chaos, as if he was outside this event. It wasn't affecting him. Right across from him, Robert Kellerman was setting up his camera, preparing to take his last photograph. Jake looked into Kellerman's lens and knew he was recording that moment. The moment Kellerman pressed the shutter, Jake felt his own phone also taking a photograph. The same moment was being recorded from two different time periods. And then everything returned to normal. Jake found himself back in 2024 in the town square. The clock showed 14:31. Only 1 minute had passed, but Jake felt as if he had been in a different time for hours. When he looked at his phone, there were new photographs, the clear images showing the bombing moment in 1943. And one of them was the frame he took of Robert Kellerman, photographing him. When Jake returned to 2024, the data the team had collected was staggering. They had recorded energy signatures that challenged everything known about physics, documented electromagnetic patterns that existed outside current scientific understanding, and captured quantum fluctuations that suggested time was far more malleable than anyone had imagined. But the most significant discovery came when they analyzed the photographs Jake's phone had taken during the displacement. The images showed not just a 1943 bombardment, but layers of time stacked on top of each other. In the same frame, they could see the Roman battle from 67 AD, the medieval plague victims, the World War I soldiers, and even glimpses of future events that hadn't yet occurred. Jake, Dr. Santos said, her voice filled with awe as she studied the data. You've documented something unprecedented. These photographs show that Saint-Pierre-du-Mont isn't just experiencing random temporal anomalies. It's a convergence point, a place where multiple timelines intersect and interact. Dr. Tanaka's analysis revealed even more startling information. The quantum signatures we recorded suggest that your displacement didn't just send you back to 1943. You were simultaneously present in all the time periods that have experienced significant events at this location. You were a multi-dimensional observer, witnessing the entire temporal history of this site. Professor Lindqvist had been studying the historical records with new understanding. This explains why our family documents show witnesses at so many different historical events. We're not just randomly appearing in the past, we're being drawn to convergence points, locations where time itself becomes unstable due to the weight of historical significance. But it was Dr. Okafor who made the connection that changed everything. She had been comparing Jake's experience with the ancient Egyptian records, and what she found sent chills through the entire team. According to the hieroglyphic records, Corbuset described a prophecy about the time walkers. He wrote that as human history approached a crucial turning point, what he called the Great Choice, more and more temporal witnesses would be called into service. The frequency of displacements would increase until witnesses were needed almost continuously. She pulled out a translation of the ancient text. Listen to this. When the children of tomorrow walk among the children of yesterday with increasing frequency, when the threads of time become so tangled that past and future dance together in the present, then shall humanity face its greatest trial. The witnesses shall be called to observe the moment when the species chooses its path among the stars or returns to dust. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. You're saying that the increase in temporal displacement events is leading up to something? Some kind of crucial decision point for humanity? It's possible, Dr. Santos said quietly. And Jake, the data we collected suggests that your family line might be particularly significant in this process. The energy signatures around you were stronger than anything we've recorded from other temporal witnesses. You're not just a witness, you might be what the ancient records call a prime observer. Over the next several days, the team shared their preliminary findings with the network of temporal witness families around the world. The response was immediate and alarming. Every family reported a dramatic increase in displacement events over the past year. Children as young as 8 were experiencing temporal shifts. Elderly family members who hadn't displaced in decades were suddenly finding themselves in different time periods. Dr. Santos received reports from colleagues in Australia whose Aboriginal temporal witness families spoke of dreamtime bleeding. Researchers in Peru documented Incan temporal witnesses manifesting at Machu Picchu with increasing frequency. Even families in remote regions of Siberia reported unusual temporal activities around ancient shamanic sites. It's happening globally, Dr. Santos told Jake during one of their research sessions. Whatever the ancient records were predicting, it's beginning. The question is, what exactly are we witnessing? What is this great choice that humanity is supposed to make? Jake spent sleepless nights studying the data, trying to make sense of the patterns they had discovered. The photographs from his displacement continued to reveal new details each time they were analyzed. Hidden in the layered images of different time periods were symbols, messages, and what appeared to be coordinates pointing to other temporal convergence sites around the world. There are more locations like Saint-Pierre-du-Mont, Jake realized during one of their analysis sessions. The coordinates in these photographs point to places all over the globe. Stonehenge, the pyramids, Angkor Wat, Easter Island, they're all showing up in the temporal echo data. Dr. Tanaka had been working on decoding the quantum signatures embedded in the photographs. Jake, I think these coordinates aren't just showing us other convergence sites. I think they're showing us a network. These locations are all connected through some kind of temporal grid that spans the entire planet. The realization hit them all simultaneously. The temporal witness families hadn't been experiencing random displacements throughout history. They had been documenting and maintaining a global network of temporal stability points, ensuring that crucial moments in human development were properly anchored across space and time. We're not just observers, Professor Lincolnvis said, his voice filled with wonder. We're guardians. Our families have been protecting the timeline itself, making sure that human history unfolds as it's supposed to. But this understanding brought with it a terrible responsibility. If the ancient prophecies were correct, if humanity was approaching its great choice, then the temporal witness families would need to be prepared for whatever role they were meant to play in that moment. Dr. Okafor had been in communication with the eldest members of her family line, shamans and record keepers, who had preserved the most ancient knowledge. Their message was both urgent and cryptic. The convergence approaches. The witnesses must gather at the prime site. When the signs align, the choice will be made not by leaders or nations, but by those who have seen all of time. "What's the prime site?" Jake asked. According to the records, it's the location where the first temporal displacement occurred, the place where human consciousness first touched the river of time and learned to walk between moments. Dr. Okafor paused, consulting her notes. The Egyptian records suggest it's somewhere in the Sahara Desert, at a site that was ancient even when the pyramids were built. Jake felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. Everything that had happened bores, finding the photograph, experiencing the displacement, meeting the team of researchers, it had been leading to this moment. He was part of something far larger than he had ever imagined, connected to a network of families who had been guarding human history for millennia. But the biggest question remained unanswered. What was this great choice that humanity would have to make? And what role would he, as a prime observer, play in ensuring that the right decision was made? As if responding to his thoughts, his phone buzzed with a new message. Like before, it came from no sender and was dated from the future. "The gathering has begun, Jake. The other prime observers are awakening. Find them before the convergence, or the choice will be made without witnesses." Jake looked around at his team of researchers, these brilliant minds who had dedicated their lives to understanding the impossible. "I think our investigation is just beginning," he said. "We need to find the other prime observers, and we need to find them fast." Dr. Santos nodded grimly. "Then we better start packing." According to the data, the next convergence event is scheduled to occur in less than 2 weeks. "Where?" Jake asked. "Stonehenge," and Jake, the energy readings we're getting from that site suggest it's going to be the strongest temporal event in recorded history. "Jake, you're experiencing one of the greatest discoveries in the history of science. You've proven the temporal echo theory, but now we need to find a way to break this loop." "Do we have to break the loop? Maybe this is happening for a reason." "What reason?" Jake couldn't answer this question, but inside, he carried the feeling that this event had a special meaning for him. Maybe there was a connection with his grandfather. Maybe it was a message from the past. That evening, he decided to talk with the elderly residents of the town. Maybe someone had seen strange things during the war. 75-year-old Henry Dubois, the museum director's father, told Jake a surprising story. "The 15 years old that day. During the bombing, my mother and I were in the basement. But after the bombing ended, when we went outside, we saw something strange. In the town square, there was a young man in modern clothes. He was holding something that glowed in his hand, like a small magic box. He looked at us, smiled, and then Jake's heart stopped. That glowing object, his phone. Did anyone else see this man? My friend Pierre saw him too. But when we told the adults, they didn't believe us. They said it was the shock from the bombing." Jake realized that his temporal echoes had been witnessed by others too, but the mystery was getting deeper instead of being solved. That night, Jake made a decision. He would return to that moment once more, but this time, he would try to understand why this was happening. The next day at 14:30, Jake was in the square again, and once again the world around him transformed. But this time, he paid more attention to the details. When he looked carefully, he noticed that the man running among the people looked like his grandfather, the grandfather he had never met, who died in the war. Jake approached that man. When their eyes met, his grandfather stopped and looked at him with surprise. "Who are you, son? What are you doing here in these clothes?" Jake's voice trembled. I'm your grandson from the future." His grandfather looked at Jake for a long time. Then he smiled. "I knew this day would come. Before I die, I wanted to see that our family line would continue, that we would survive this war." "Grandfather, what's happening here? Why am I in this time loop?" Sometimes, son, the bond between family members is so strong that it transcends time. You came here to witness our family's most important moment, to understand where you came from. At that moment, the bombing sounds intensified. His grandfather looked around with concern. I have to go now, Jake. But remember, you carry all of us within you. The past, present, and future are connected. His grandfather ran toward the church where civilians were taking shelter. Jake watched him leave, knowing it would be the last time he saw him. When Kellerman took the photograph, Jake felt that the loop was finally complete. He had witnessed his family's history, understood his roots. But when he returned to 2024, he realized that the mystery was far from over, because now there were other photographs on his phone, photographs from different time periods, 1920s, 1890s, even earlier. And in each of them, there was a figure from his family line, all carrying the same mysterious objects, all looking toward the future with the same calm expression. Jake understood that he was part of a much larger story. His family had always been connected to these temporal anomalies. Perhaps they were guardians of time, witnesses of history. But the biggest mystery still remained unsolved. Why was this happening? What was their purpose? As Jake looked at his phone screen, a new message appeared, a message with no sender, dated from the future. The journey has just begun, Jake. Find the others. Jake looked around. In the quiet town square, everything seemed normal, but he now knew that beneath this normalcy lay secrets spanning centuries. He put his phone in his pocket and started walking. Somewhere out there, there were others like him, others who had left their traces in different time periods. The mystery of the photograph taken in 1943 had been solved, but it was just the beginning of a much larger mystery. As Jake walked away from the square, if someone had looked carefully, they might have noticed that his shadow on the ground looked different from the others, as if it belonged to a different time, a different reality. The mystery continued to deepen with each step Jake took. Somewhere in time, other family members were waiting for their moment to appear. The story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning.